The air in the grand ballroom of the Silver Peak Hotel was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, aged mahogany, and the unmistakable musk of overconfidence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain, casting a jagged, shimmering light over Chicago's elite. I stood near the periphery, my back against a marble pillar, watching the vultures circle. I've always found that you learn more from the edges of a room than from the center. I tugged at my collar. It was a charcoal gray tailored suit, nice enough to blend in, but not flashy enough to draw a second glance. That was always my specialty, blending in. For 15 years, I worked as a forensic auditor for the Department of Justice. My job wasn't just to follow the money, it was to find the ghost in the machine, the tiny, microscopic errors that people make when they think they're too smart to get caught. I've looked into the eyes of men who controlled billions, watching the exact moment they realized their lives were over because of a misplaced decimal point. But tonight, I wasn't an auditor. I was just David, the husband of Elena Miller Vance, the newly minted Senior VP of Acquisitions at Miller & Associates. Elena was 20 feet away, radiant in a deep emerald dress, her laughter cutting through the low hum of corporate chatter like a bell. She was the star, I was the shadow, and I was perfectly fine with that until I saw him. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Welcome to Family Secrets and Revenge. His name was Marcus Thorne, and he moved through the room like he owned the oxygen everyone else was breathing. Marcus was the kind of man who didn't just walk, he strutted with a predatory rhythm. He was the firm's golden boy, a man whose track record for closing impossible deals was matched only by the trail of broken careers he left in his wake. I'd heard the stories from Elena. She'd come home late, her eyes tired, telling me about Marcus's tactics, how he'd take credit for her research, how he'd speak over her in boardrooms, and how he had a knack for making suggestive comments that were just vague enough to dodge an HR bullet. Seeing him in person was different. There was a slickness to him, a coating of unearned entitlement that made my skin crawl. He started moving toward Elena. I watched his eyes. They weren't looking at her as a colleague or even as a rival. They were looking at her as a conquest. He stepped into her personal space, closer than professional courtesy allowed, and placed a hand on the small of her back. I felt a familiar coldness settle in my stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the cold, calculating focus I used to get when I was building a racketeering case. I finished my scotch, set the glass on a passing waiter's tray, and began my approach. I stepped into the circle, my movements fluid and unhurried. I didn't rush. I simply occupied the space next to my wife. "Elena, honey," I said, my voice low and steady, "I think the waiter is looking for you regarding the keynote timing." Elena looked at me, a flash of visible relief crossing her face. "Oh, thank you. David." She turned to the man beside her. "Marcus, have you met my husband, David?" Marcus didn't remove his hand immediately. He let it linger for a second too long before finally dropping it. He turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. He looked me up and down, lingering on my shoes. Solid, comfortable, but definitely not the $4,000 Italian loafers he was wearing. "Ah, the legendary David," Marcus said, his voice carrying a practiced, theatrical baritone. "Elena mentioned you. You're the one who stays home with the little ones, right? The domestic engineer?" He let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "That's noble, truly. I'm not sure I could ever find fulfillment in carpools and laundry. But I suppose the world needs followers as much as it needs leaders." The insult was wrapped in a layer of faux admiration, the classic weapon of a corporate bully. I just smiled, a small, thin smile that didn't reveal my teeth. "It's a different kind of work, Marcus. It requires a lot of patience and an eye for detail. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about someone by watching how they handle the small things." His eyes flickered, a momentary confusion passing through them before he masked it with boredom. "I'm sure. Anyway, Elena, we should discuss the Sterling merger before the main course. I have some ideas that might streamline your involvement. The dinner bell rang, saving him from further conversation. But the seating chart, likely orchestrated by Marcus himself, placed us directly across from him. The table was a battlefield of silver and crystal. For the next hour, I sat through the most painful display of arrogance I've ever witnessed. Marcus dominated the conversation, pivoting every topic back to his own brilliance. He spoke about his vintage car collection, his weekend in the Hamptons, and his instinct for the market. "It's all about the kill," Marcus said, stabbing a piece of medium-rare steak. "Some people are born with the hunger, and some people are just born to be the meal. Don't you agree, David?" The table went quiet. Elena's hand tightened around her wine glass so hard her knuckles turned white. She was a professional, a powerhouse in her own right. But Marcus was a master at the slow burn provocation. He was trying to embarrass me to diminish her. He leaned forward, the smell of expensive wine and malice wafting across the table. "I've always wondered, David, does it ever feel strange, knowing your wife is out here in the real world, making the moves while you're at home? It must be hard for a man to feel like the head of a household when he's not the one providing the power." He glanced at the other partners at the table, looking for an audience. "I mean, look at Elena. She's a Ferrari. She needs a driver who knows how to redline. If you ever find yourself struggling to keep up with the pace, David, just know I've got a very steady hand on the wheel." Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel the eyes of the firm's senior partners on me. They expected a flare of temper, a clumsy comeback, or a humiliated retreat. They didn't know that, for 15 years, I was trained to wait for exactly this moment. The moment when a target gets so comfortable, they stop looking for the trap. I set my silverware down with a deliberate, silent precision. I took a slow sip of water, then looked directly at Marcus. I didn't look angry. I looked interested, like a scientist observing a particularly loud insect. "You know, Marcus," I began, my voice calm and conversational. "It's fascinating you mentioned the Sterling merger. I was looking through the public disclosure filings for Miller and Associates last night, just light reading while the kids were asleep. I noticed something curious about the brokerage firms involved in the secondary acquisitions." Marcus's smirk didn't disappear, but it stiffened. "Oh, when I didn't know stay-at-home dads were so interested in SEC filings." "It's a hobby," I said. "But what really caught my eye was your watch. A Patek Philippe 5270P, right? It's a masterpiece, platinum case, perpetual calendar, chronograph. It retails for about $200,000. "I have good taste," Marcus snapped. "You do," I agreed. "But what's interesting is that according to the firm's public salary brackets and the standard bonus structure for your level, your total compensation last year shouldn't have exceeded $400,000. After taxes and your mortgage on that Oak Street penthouse, that watch represents nearly 80% of your disposable income for the year. Either you're very bad with money or you have a secondary source of income." The atmosphere at the table shifted instantly. The other partners, who had been chuckling at Marcus's jokes moments ago, were now very still. These were people who lived and breathed numbers. They were already doing the math in their heads. Marcus's face went from a smug bronze to a sickly, pale gray. "I told you I have investments. Private equity. Is that what we're calling the O'Malley Development Project these days?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. I leaned in, my eyes locked onto his. "Because from where I'm sitting, that looks less like an investment and more like a series of Shell-Corp accounts registered in the Cayman Islands, specifically accounts that received large wire transfers exactly 3 days after the Miller-Sterling preliminary talks began. It's funny how the paper trail always leads back to the same digital signature." The blood didn't just leave Marcus's face. It seemed to leave his entire body. He looked like he was about to faint into his creme brulee. He tried to speak, but his throat seemed to have closed up. "I spent 15 years as a forensic auditor for the DOJ, Marcus," I whispered, loud enough for only our end of the table to hear. "I've seen better men than you try to hide smaller amounts than that. You made the biggest mistake a criminal can make. You assumed the person you were talking to was as shallow as you are." I picked up my wine glass and toasted him. Enjoy the dessert. I hear the food in the federal system is a lot less refined. The silence that followed my revelation wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. The kind of pressurized stillness that precedes a skyscraper's collapse. Marcus sat paralyzed, his silver fork still hovering inches from his open mouth. There's a piece of Wagyu beef cooling into a tasteless lump. Around us, the muffled sounds of the gala, the rhythmic clinking of crystal, the distant jazzy trill of a saxophone, and the polite, hollow laughter of people who had no idea a career was being incinerated 10 feet away, felt like they belonged to a different dimension. Elena looked at me, her eyes wide, shimmering with a mixture of shock and a strange, newfound electricity. She knew I was capable, and she knew I had a boring past in government work, but she had never seen the predator in me. She had never seen the man who hunted monsters in suits. I felt her hand slide under the table, her fingers gripping my knee with a strength that surprised me. Her touch was grounding, a reminder that while I was playing a dangerous game of corporate chess, I was doing it to protect her kingdom. Hey, Marcus finally found his voice, though it sounded thin, reedy, and desperate. You're You're insane. You're making up stories to sound important because you're intimidated. Shell companies? Caymans? You've been watching too many spy movies in your sweatpants, David. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet, pathetic wheeze. I didn't blink. I didn't even offer him the satisfaction of a smile. I simply reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. The one I'd used to map out the spiderweb of routing numbers I'd discovered during my late-night deep dives into the firm's public disclosures. I didn't open it to show him. I just tapped it against the edge of the mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gavel. I don't watch movies, Marcus. I read ledgers, and yours is bleeding out in real time. And by Monday morning, the only thing you'll be driving is a plastic tray in a cafeteria. The next morning, the sun rose over Lake Michigan in jagged shades of bruised purple and cold, unforgiving gold. I was already awake, long before the kids stirred, sitting in the blue light of my home office with the hum of 3 monitors vibrating through my desk. When I told Marcus I had old friends, I wasn't just bluffing to win a dinner argument. I was opening a door he could never close. I spent 4 hours on encrypted VoIP calls, my voice low so as not to wake the house. My first call was to Sarah Jenkins, a lead investigator at the SEC, who still owed me a massive favor from a multi-state Ponzi scheme case we broke back in 18. I didn't ask her to do anything illegal or outside the lines. I simply pointed her toward the O'Malley development filings and suggested her team look at the time-stamped metadata on the wire transfers originating from the Miller & Associates server. If you were in David's shoes, facing a man who insulted your marriage and your integrity, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. I wasn't just looking for a quick win. I was looking for a total, scorched earth erasure of his professional existence. Marcus Thorne hadn't just insulted my choice to be a father. He had been actively sabotaging Elena's career for the better part of a year. He had been rerouting her high-value leads to his own ghost accounts to ensure her productivity numbers looked stagnant compared to his golden boy performance. He wasn't just a corporate bully. He was a common thief stealing the fruits of my wife's labor. By 9 a.m., I had sent a 40-page dossier to the Treasury Department. The hunt was no longer mine. It belonged to the United States government. By Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the Willis Tower had shifted from the celebratory high of the gala to a thick, suffocating paranoia. Word of the dinner table audit had spread through the office grapevine like a wildfire in a dry forest. Marcus hadn't shown up for the 8 a.m. executive briefing, and his assistant was telling anyone who asked that he was working from home with a migraine. I dropped Elena off at the front entrance, the wind off the lake whipping around the glass towers. She looked at me before getting out, her hand lingering on the door handle, her expression unreadable. David, are you absolutely sure about this? If your math is even a fraction off, Julian will fire me just for being associated with the accusation. Everything we've built. I'm never wrong about the math, Elena, I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. The numbers don't have egos. They don't have a need to feel superior at dinner parties. They don't lie to make themselves look like stars. They just exist. And right now, Marcus's numbers are screaming for help. As she walked through the revolving doors, I noticed two men in dark, nondescript suits and sensible shoes standing near the security desk. They didn't look like the usual corporate security contractors. They had the posture of men who were used to carrying badges and sidearms. They didn't look at the art on the walls. They scanned the exits. For the wheels of justice weren't just turning, they were accelerating. At exactly 11:15 a.m., the glass door to the executive conference room swung open with a force that rattled the frames. Marcus was inside, his tie undone, sweat beads rolling down his forehead as he frantically tried to remote wipe his personal encrypted drive. He thought he had a window of time. He thought he was the smartest person in the room because he knew a few tech tricks. He was wrong. The IT department had already locked his administrative permissions at my silent suggestion to the Internal Compliance Board. When he saw the federal agents entering with a federal search warrant, he didn't fight. He didn't even yell. The arrogance that had defined him at the gala vanished, replaced by a hollow gray mask of terror. When he sank into his ergonomic leather chair, the very chair he'd used to belittle my wife, and watched in a daze as they bagged his laptop, his encrypted tablets, and even his gold-plated desk accessories. I was standing in the hallway, having been invited as a consultant by the firm's CEO, Julian Miller, to explain the technical architecture of the fraud I had uncovered. As Marcus was led out in steel handcuffs, his path crossed mine near the elevators. The golden boy looked like a ghost. "Why?" he hissed, his voice cracking as the agents paused for the elevator. "Why blow up a 30-year career over a few jokes at a party? You're a psychopath." I leaned in, my voice a whisper that only he could hear over the hum of the building. "It wasn't the jokes, Marcus. It was the hand on my wife's back. Ron, and it was the fact that you thought I was too small to notice your hands in the till. I'm a patient man, but I have very strict boundaries. Consider this your final audit." The fallout for Marcus Thorne was catastrophic and immediate, but for Elena, it was a profound rebirth. With Marcus's adjusted numbers revealed to be a systematic fraud, the firm's internal auditors realized that Elena was actually the top-performing VP for the last 3 quarters by a massive margin. Every deal Marcus had supposedly closed had actually been built on the foundation of her research, her networking, and her strategic planning. He had been a parasite on her talent. Julian Miller called us both into his office that afternoon. The room smelled of expensive tobacco and pure, unadulterated panic. "David," Julian said, looking at me with a newfound, slightly terrified respect, the kind of respect people give to an unexploded bomb. "We owe your wife a profound apology, and we owe you a debt for saving this firm from a RICO investigation that would have ended us all." Elena was offered Marcus's senior executive position on the spot, along with a seat on the board of directors and a retroactive bonus that covered our mortgage for the next 5 years. She didn't just earn it. She had been doing the job for years while Marcus took the credit. I just cleared the debris from her path so the world could finally see her clearly. 6 months later, the trial was a mere formality. Marcus Thorne's private equity investments turned out to be a classic textbook embezzlement scheme involving nearly $4 million of client escrow funds. He was sentenced to 72 months in a federal correctional facility in Terre Haute. I sometimes think about that Patek Philippe watch. I wonder if he still thinks about the weight of it on his wrist while he's wearing a state-issued jumpsuit. Most people in this city think power is about how much you can take, how much you can hoard, and how many people you can step on to get to the penthouse. I've always believed that real power is about how much you can protect and how quietly you can move when the people you love are threatened. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. The stay-at-home dad label didn't bother me anymore. In fact, it became a bit of a whispered legend in Chicago's financial circles, where people started realizing that just because a man is holding a diaper bag or waiting in the school pickup line doesn't mean he isn't holding the digital keys to your entire empire. Elena's career didn't just grow, it skyrocketed. She became the industry face of ethical leadership and integrity at Miller and Associates. We eventually moved out of our city condo and into a quiet, sprawling house with a view of the deep woods, far away from the cramped egos and the shark-infested waters of the downtown ballrooms. But I kept my leather notebook. I kept my encrypted drives, and I kept my contacts at the DOJ. Because in a world built on greed, there will always be another Marcus Thorne waiting in the wings. I taught my children that quiet strength is the most dangerous weapon in the world. I told them that you don't need to bark or beat your chest to be the biggest dog in the yard. You just need to know exactly where the fence is broken and how to fix it, or how to walk through it. Every once in a while, I'll get a call or an encrypted message from someone, a former colleague, a friend of a friend who's being squeezed by a corporate bully, asking me to take a look at some suspicious numbers. I usually say no. I'm busy with science fair projects, soccer practices, and making sure the dinner's on the table when Elena gets home. But if the person on the other end of those numbers is a predator, if they're hurting someone who can't fight back, well, I might just find a few hours in the middle of the night to do a little math. Tonight, we're back at the Silver Peak Hotel. It's a different gala, a different year, and a completely different energy. Elena isn't a +1 anymore. She's the keynote speaker. I'm standing in the same corner of the ballroom, wearing a new charcoal suit, sipping the same mid-range scotch. A young, hungry associate walks up to me, looking to network. He sees my simple watch, then looks at my wife on the stage, commanding the room with a single sentence. "Must be nice," he says, a hint of that familiar, arrogant smirk on his face, being the guy who just hangs out behind the scenes while she does all the heavy lifting for the family. I just smile at him. It's a small, thin, knowing smile. "It is nice," I say, my voice smooth as silk. "You have no idea how much I can see from back here. You'd be surprised what people leave behind when they think nobody's looking." He looks confused for a second, then shrugs and walks away. He has no idea how close he just came to an audit. Life is a ledger. Every action you take, every person you insult, every act of greed you commit is a line item. And eventually, whether it takes a week or a decade, the bill always comes due. Marcus Thorne forgot that. He forgot that the people you think are invisible, the parents, the supporters, the quiet ones, are usually the ones watching you the closest. Justice isn't always a lightning bolt or a dramatic courtroom scene. Sometimes justice is just a quiet man at a dinner table with a very long memory, a sharp eye for detail, and a talent for making sure the numbers finally add up to the truth. I want to thank you all for watching and for being a part of the Family Secrets and Revenge community. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. So subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden truths of the human heart, and share your overall thoughts on the story in the comments below. We read every single one, and your support means the world to us. Remember, never underestimate the person who stays silent. They might just be waiting for you to finish your sentence so they can start your countdown.